Good afternoon, and welcome to the UTC Grant Managers session. Caesar, you can take it away.
Thank you, Dawn, and good afternoon, everybody. So today in this Grant Managers meeting, we have 6 presentations. It's going to be started off by Amy Stearns, who's a UTC Grants Manager from USDOT, followed by Denise Dunn, who is also a Grant Manager. Denise is going to be followed by Robin Kline, who is also UTC Grants Manager, followed by Dawn Tucker Thomas, who is also a UTC Grant Manager. In addition, we're going to have Janet Daly, who is the Indexing Manager at the Transportation Research Board. Following her is going to be Leighton Christensen, who is the Librarian from the Office of Information and Library Sciences at BTS USDOT. So with that, Amy, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Caesar, and good afternoon, everyone, unless you're in Alaska, in which case it's good morning. I'll begin with the continuation awards that our office is processing. Back in February, Caesar sent an email to all the UTC directors stating the effect of the FAST Act Extension Act on UTC, which is that the original 35 FAST Act UTCs are receiving an additional year of funding. Those UTCs have already applied for that funding, and the application paperwork and the award documents are being processed by our office now. This will take some time, as a new presidential administration means new people and changed processes, but we expect to issue those awards later this summer with an effective date of October 1st, which is what you put on your budgets. Caesar's email also noted that the Extension Act did not provide awards for the additional 2 national UTCs and 4 Tier 1 UTCs that were authorized through appropriations rather than through the FAST Act itself. As Caesar mentioned earlier, until Congress either completes new transportation authorization legislation or another extension of the FAST Act, there is no information available about what funding may be available for the UTC program in future years, about what the makeup of the program will be as far as the number or type of centers, or about whether or when there will be a competition. But we are hopeful to hear something before too much longer. Last year at this meeting, I gave a talk about federal guidance issued by the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, on relief for grantees experiencing COVID-19 related issues. Updated OMB guidance was issued on March 19th of this year. This guidance extends various waivers that were allowed in the earlier guidance for things such as the grantee's registration, certification in the system for award management. This doesn't seem to have been an issue for any of the UTC program's grantees. I just did the system check on all the 35 applicants for the continuation grants, and nobody wasn't in there as they should have been. Another waiver that's been extended is allowance of certain pre-award costs incurred from March 15th, 2021 on new grants awarded. And for us, this does not affect any UTC program grants, the newest of which were awarded in August of 2020. Another waiver is flexibility with application deadlines on grants being solicited, which we do not currently have for the UTC program, allowing grantees to request and agencies to approve extensions for submission of financial and other reporting requirements. We had approved some of these extensions in the earlier part of the pandemic, but reporting appears to be coming in a timely manner now. And extension of closeout on expired grants. We have allowed this for some of the MAP 21 UTCs that terminated between late 2019 and early 2021. And probably of most interest to this group, no cost extensions on expiring awards. But OMB allows this in their guidance only for those grants scheduled to expire on a date no later than December 31st, 2021. The UTC program has no grants ending by that exact date. The status of the current UTC grants termination dates is this summer, thanks to the FAST Act extension legislation, the original 35 FAST Act grants, the 5 nationals, 10 regionals, and 20 tier 1s, will be getting an additional year of funding plus a 1-year time extension. So their termination dates will become September 30, 2023 for most of the UTCs, with September 30, 2024 for the regions 1, 2, and 3 grants that were awarded later than the others. The 2 additional national UTCs authorized through appropriations in 2018 terminate on September 30, 2023, and the 4 additional Tier 1 UTCs authorized through appropriations in 2020 terminate on either January 31st or July 31st of 2022. So those are the soonest termination dates. We've already had questions about extensions to current grants. As I've explained, the current OMB guidance doesn't provide for a routine extension for any of the UTC grants. So any extension would need to be done through our office's customary process. As I had emphasized in my talk last year, situational details must always justify a request for extension. As the agency managing the UTC program, OST-R must consider the effects that each grant has on our overall workload and support costs, especially during times when a competition is held and new grantees are coming on board. So we don't, as a rule, actively encourage extensions. We do, however, want each grant to provide the greatest possible return on the taxpayer's investment, so we do consider requests for extensions that clearly demonstrate the benefit to the grant of an extension. In making a request for an extension, UTC should be prepared to identify a new extended termination date that is the soonest date the UTC believes work on the grant can be fully performed, to indicate as specifically as possible what activities would not be completed by the original termination date and how those activities would be done during the requested extension period, to state if COVID-19 impacted grant activities that require an extension. Although current UTC grants are technically outside of the OMB relief guidance, the UTC program staff, of course, understands the pandemic's impact on our universities and want to take that into consideration. To provide a new budget showing how the funds remaining on the grant at the time the request is made would be used. And finally, to commit to continuing to submit all of the UTC grant reporting requirements during the. Okay, back to extensions. Each situation when an extension is needed is unique, and as I keep saying, the details must justify the request. But to try to put some reasonable parameters around this for you, a typical extension request is for any time from 3 months to 1 year, depending on the circumstances. We generally do not accept requests for extensions more than a year ahead of the grant's current termination date. Though if there are institutional issues that make waiting to submit a request problematic, please do reach out to your grant manager to discuss the situation. We received a few other questions from the recent survey of CUTC members that was done prior to this meeting, and I will answer those. Question, OST-R asked UTCs to include in recent semi-annual progress reports information about how COVID-19 affected UTC operations. What is OST-R doing with this information, and can you provide a synopsis of what you found? We did this primarily for audit purposes to document what was going on at each UTC so that any perceived reduction in effort, productivity could be put into context. We don't have plans to prevent this information collectively, but each UTC posts its semi-annual reports on its website. So those are there for anyone interested in reading them. In general, as you'd expect, UTCs were most heavily impacted at the beginning of the pandemic as they explored alternative ways to conduct work while staff and students were off-site and facilities were closed. And as routines have been established and things have begun to reopen, the situation has improved. Another question, is there any chance that matching fund requirements could be relaxed because of the pandemic and the trouble that some centers are having obtaining matching funds? And the short answer is no. Those requirements are in the UTC program statute, and matching fund requirements are not something that is addressed in the OMB guidance on relief for grantees affected by COVID. So OST-R does not have authority to change those statutory requirements. And one other question, could OST-R share some best practices on developing the semi-annual progress reports? Because we ourselves don't prepare those reports, we aren't aware of how things happen behind the scenes between the UTC staff and researchers and so forth. But when we have this meeting in person next year at Big Sky, hopefully we can reconstitute the administrative managers sessions that we've had in previous years, where the individuals from the centers who are responsible for those progress reports can meet among themselves and discuss topics like this. So we'll make sure we get that on the agenda for next year. That's all I have on my list. So thank you for being on the call. And are there any questions for me at this point?
Yes, Amy, we do have two questions. The first one is should the cover page of the semi-annual report reflect the extended date for the original FAST Act awardees?
When the new date goes into effect, which will be when you receive the grant documents, then yes, I would go ahead and change the termination date to the new date. Good point.
Okay, and the next question, it's a comment and a question. It states that I thought that there would be a conflict of interest to pay proposal reviewers for UTC, but I seem to see some centers did pay for reviewers. Is there any guidelines on this issue? So I'm not sure if, we want to address this now or hold it off till.
Yeah, as always, the first thing I want to do is look in the OMB guidance, the regular OMB guidance for grants to CFR 200. I'm pretty certain that a couple of my grantees have paid reviewers, and the answer would be a combination of what the OMB grant regulations allow and what your own university allows. There may be policies internally that you should be aware of.
Okay, and those are the only two questions that I see so far in the chat session. Thank you, Amy.
All right, thank you. And I guess I turn it over to Denise.
Next up, we have Denise Dunn.
Thank you, Dawn. Hello, everyone. I'll wait a minute let me bring up the presentation. There we go. Hello, everyone. I want to take a few minutes and talk about reporting research projects when they don't reach a successful completion. Slide 2, please. Next slide. We all know that there are many causes that can prevent a project from being successfully completed, which results in its early termination. For instance, when the PI moves to another university and asks to move the project, or when there's a change in the PI, or perhaps continuing the project will produce an undesirable output, or maybe that essential resources are no longer available. Again, there can be any number of causes. And as you know, prior approval is required when the situation involves a request to transfer the project or when the PI changes. And the discussion you have with your grant manager in these situations will help determine the best course of action, whether it's to approve the transfer of the project or to assign a new PI to the project to allow it to continue. Next slide. And so in matters that cause, and so no matter the cause going forward, we ask that you notify your grant manager when a project has been terminated so it can be documented in the official grant files and on hand for audit purposes if needed. In situations where approval is required, your grant manager serves as a notification. The discussion you have with your grant manager serves as a notification and the documentation will take place. However, in situations where prior approval is not required, we ask that you email your grant manager with the following information, again, just to let us know that a project did not reach a successful completion. So in that email, it should include the project title, the effective date of the termination, a description of the project's objectives, and an explanation for its termination, as well as it would be good to know how the remaining resources are being reallocated. We also ask that the same information be included in your city annual progress report in section 6, changes and problems. And lastly, we ask that you be sure to update the project status in the RIP database. And that's it. That's all I have. Thank you. And let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Denise. I don't see any questions posted yet, but we might have some towards the end. Okay. Next up, we have Robin Kline.
Greetings, everyone. I'm going to give you a little bit of an update on the new UTC Speakers Bureau, and I'm going to stop my video here because I'm getting a message that I have a low bandwidth. So bear with me. There we go. All right, make sure I'm where I'm supposed to be. So you probably heard Caesar speak about this new initiative that we do have, and it's the UTC Guest Speaker Program that we are doing in concert with the ITS JPO office, along with ITS America. And overall, the mission of the speaker program is to connect transportation industry leaders and innovators with university UTC students in the classroom and subject-specific transportation categories. And the first session that we're going to do is going to focus on automated vehicles. We had thought that we could probably start before now, but we did learn, as Caesar mentioned, that due to the academic year, as well as students and instructors being pretty much zoomed out, that perhaps doing something late August, early September would be more in alignment with the academic year and with the availability of students. So that's what we're going to look at. I've reached out to a number of UTCs who have the most research in automated vehicles as a test. We're doing this as a test drive first, just for this first session to see how it goes. There's probably going to be a number that we need to get out along the way. So for the first session, like I said, which should probably happen around late August, early September, we're going to focus on automated vehicles, and it's going to be just a handful of universities. Depending on how that goes, we're going to decide on what the topic for the next session will be, and probably have a more broad outreach to other universities if it seems like we can handle even more UTCs than just the handful we're going to start with. I will be in contact with each of your UTCs on this as planning goes forth, and we look forward to working with you on this. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Okay, thank you, Robin. I don't see any questions in the chat with regards to the webinar series. However, backpedaling to Denise, I do see a question that's related to what you just presented on.
Okay.
And the question is if a change in PI or move to another institution but the project is not terminated, does this require prior approval from the grant manager?
If a change in PI, if
If
it's a change in
it's
PI, but it doesn't
PI,
affect the project?
correct.
Okay, well, no, if it doesn't affect the project, then no. We don't require prior approval, if our PI moves to another institution, but just in terms of the project or any of the funding that was awarded to that institution that moves outside of it requires prior approval.
Okay, and then someone else also asked a question, will the slides from today's presenters be available following the meeting? And yes, they should be.
It should be.
Mm-hmm. And, all right. Okay, so let me go ahead and proceed to my session. All right, let me share my screen. Okay. Today, I wanted to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion during this session. As many of you know, President Biden, since being in office, has signed a variety of his executive orders as well as memorandums, probably about over 40 of them from the last I've seen. I don't have the exact count, but I definitely know that he has signed at least more than 40. The first that I wanted to touch upon that I think is applicable to the university community would be one that Robert touched on earlier, which is Executive Order 13985, and this is advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. With this executive order, we do encourage, they want us to encourage, engage with members of underserved communities, as well as increase coordination, communication, and engagement with community-based organizations, as well as civil rights organizations. And some of those might include schools or civic organizations like the NAACP or fraternal organizations. So whenever you're involved with your research and you're interacting with these communities, please be sure to touch upon that in your semi-annual progress report. Another is tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. That's Executive Order 14008. So if you get a chance, you can pull that up, as well as protecting public health and the environment and restoring science to tackle the climate crisis. So the U.S. Department of Transportation, we do have our Climate Change Center that has been resurrected during this administration, and they're aggressively focusing on issues dealing with climate change. The next is the Memorandum on Tribal Consultation and Strengthening Nation-to-Nation Relationships. This particular executive order, if you could, as you see, working with the tribal colleges and universities, again, increasing diversity amongst the UTCs and your consortium partners. So we do have someone on board with the U.S. Department of Transportation that is going to serve as focusing on our tribal affairs, and this person is going to be an appointed position. It's an appointed position. So again, if you could forward any of your success stories dealing with American Indian and Alaska Native tribal nations to your grant manager, as well as include this in your semi-annual progress report, because I am aware that we will have future reporting requirements on this very exact issue. Another is the Memorandum on Restoring Trust in Government through Scientific Integrity and Evidence-Based Policymaking. Again, Dr. Robert Hampshire is going to be serving as our Chief Science Officer for the department, advising the Secretary of Transportation. And then we also have the Scientific Integrity Officer position, which will be announced fairly shortly. So the department will be focusing on supporting these initiatives as well. There are some initiatives that are being led by the National Academy of Sciences that I thought you might be interested in. And the first one is a report that they completed dealing with minority serving institutions. America's Unutilized Resource for Strengthening the STEM Workforce. So I did include the website link in case anybody wanted to review it. They are also holding a variety of town halls, working with the historically Black colleges and universities, as well as the minority serving institutions. And with these town halls, they are focusing on what HBCUs and MSIs are doing to advance STEM workforce preparation, education, and research. They're also trying to discuss solutions. They're also trying to find solutions to address and deal with some of the barriers faced by HBCUs and MSIs. The initiatives led by the White House Initiative for Historically Black Colleges and Universities and Deloitte Consulting that I've been involved with. This past February, they had the 3rd annual HBCU Presidents Forum, where presidents from all of the HBCUs were involved in discussing the challenges and barriers that they experience when obtaining government contracts, grants, and cooperative agreements. We also got to learn about their unique capabilities, as well as collaboration models and partnerships that have been used in the past and have been very successful. And then we discussed some of their infrastructure needs to help them better participate in federal research grants and contracts. I wanted to let everybody know that there is an upcoming HBCU training academy. So they're holding these monthly series with almost every executive branch in the federal government. So the Department of Transportation, our series will be held on July 21st at 3 p.m. And the goal of this is to give the audience, which is primarily HBCUs, insight into contracting opportunities and grant opportunities with the U.S. Department of Transportation. I sat in on the one with the Department of Defense, which was very informative. They focused on cybersecurity. We're obviously going to focus on transportation research and what this community can do. The speakers are going to be Dr. Robert Hampshire, as well as Dr. Willie Smith. He is the department's senior procurement executive. I wanted to have the UTCs aware, as well as the other universities, of all the workforce development programs that we have within the department. We do have some very strict deadlines, say for instance with the STIPDIG program, the Summer Transportation Internship for Diverse Groups, as well as the Secretarial Internship Program. If you can let your students know to check using the website link below, check the website. Usually by early fall, I would say the October timeframe. Normally the deadline for these internship opportunities is by the end of December. So if you click on that link, you will find a listing of these workforce development programs, as well as several others that the department offers and provides to students. Again, I'm not sure if all the students are aware, but we did run into a couple of interesting situations where there were some students that wanted to intern with the U.S. Department of Transportation, but missed the deadline. So, and I wasn't able to help them, get their paperwork through. So I wanted to share this information with you all. And that's all I had. I'm not sure if there's any questions. Let me see. Okay.
There are 3 questions that popped up while you were talking.
Okay. You could.
So the first is that, will the slides from today's presenters be available following the meeting?
Yes, they will be available, as well as a recording of, the grant manager's session will be available as well.
The second question is, who is the intended audience for the UTC Speakers Bureau series?
Robin?
Robin?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The intended audience is actually the UTCs, UTC students and professors. That's the intended audience.
And the last question is, since we cannot meet in person to discuss until Big Sky, could we get someone to add possibly 3 or 4 SAPRs from last April that the grant managers like to act as templates moving forward.
Again, Amy kind of addressed this earlier, so we can, meet as a group to further discuss with regards to sample templates that.
Yeah, if I may, Dawn, I'm cringing at the word template because these are unique. These are absolutely unique to each center. However, if the person who asked that question wants to contact us, we can think about what your center is, size, type, subject, and make some suggestions of good ones to read. Is that okay?
Right, and also in the in the general deliverables and reporting requirements document, if you follow the flow of when we discuss the semi-annual progress report, that would give you the structure of what we're looking for and the content, if that helps.
There is an outline in the
Yes.
requirements.
Are there any more, Caesar?
No, that's it.
This is Leighton. I just have a quick comment if I can.
Yes.
So I wanted to get back to the president's memorandum about dealing with Native nations and indigenous peoples. One of the things that, if I get my way in the update of the public access policy, which we'll be talking about in a couple of minutes, one of the new ethical guidelines that we will be adopting at USDOT are the care principles for indigenous data governance. And this is a new understanding of ethically handling data, whereas over the past couple of years, indigenous nations around the globe have gotten together to say, we don't treat personal data or data about our community in the same way that many in the Western world do. We don't just give it away to Amazon or Google whole share. We see the data as a collective good for our community, for our nation, and we want to have a say in how that data and how that knowledge is used. And so folks across the globe, Europe, folks a part of the Research Data Alliance have been adopting the care principles for indigenous data governance. I have suggested this to DOT for concurrence with the public access plan coming up. So you may be seeing that from us. I suggest that you start making yourself familiar with it now if you haven't. I will send the link. Right now I can't figure out how to put it into the chat, but I will send the link around to folks so that you can read on this. There's folks to contact. I can also make a few introductions for folks if they want to get introduced to folks who are organizing around the care principles. Some of them are obviously many of them are in the Western states of the United States. So if you're one of the Western UTCs, you might want to jump on the front end of this. So I'll leave it at that. If you have any other questions, shoot me an email and I will try to get the link into the chat somewhere or another. Thanks.
Dawn?
Yes, Caesar.
We have one more question. The question is, Dawn, it's directed to you. Can you please provide more guidance on the types of details you wish to be included when reporting the critical work of our Navajo tech partners?
Well, the first would be any type of workforce development work that you're involved with. So if you could include that information, what are you doing to increase the number of American Indians in the transportation industry or the Alaska Natives? So any type of research work that you might be doing for the tribes or working collaboratively with the tribal community, that would also help. But anything dealing with the Native American community that you're working, I know that there are several UTCs, there are several universities that are doing work with them. And I know one of my UTCs, I see the list of research projects that they are involved with. So I'm keeping a mental note of that. I'm also, when I do receive the semi-annual progress report, I will copy and paste that information, some of this listing of projects that they're involved with. I will copy and paste it onto another form, Microsoft Word form, just to keep track, because I'm sure that we're going to have questions. I'm not sure if they're going to ask us for financial data. I do know that they are going to look to see what kind of financial investments that we are providing to the tribal community, and if it's maybe directly from USDOT to the tribal colleges and universities. Also, similar to what we've done in the past, where I had to track the financial funding from the lead UTC to the minority serving institutions and the HBCUs. So again, I'm not sure which direction the U.S. Department of Education is going in this area, or the White House, but I do know that there is going to be some things coming down the pike with the tribal colleges and universities in the Native American community. So, and thank you, Leighton, for that information. If you could share that, or maybe send it to me via email, and I could try to figure out how to post it in the chat so everyone could have access to this. Are there any more questions, Caesar?
Nope, that's it.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Janet Daly from the National Academy of Sciences.
Thank you, Dawn. I am the indexing manager for the Transportation Research Board's Transportation Research Information Services. And I wanted to give you guys a quick update on some of the things that we have for you that will help you meet your grant requirements concerning posting your research on RIP and TRID, and also point out some resources that we have that you could pass along to your researchers. So everyone should see my slides. Great. First, a quick overview on what you need to do to get your research projects in the Research in Progress database. Remember, this one is the database that's for ongoing or recently completed projects. And this one is unique because this is the one where the UTCs actually enter their own projects using a data entry system that we have. So every UTC gets one account that any members of the UTC can share for entering and updating their projects. They update them as the project moves along. Once you've entered your project in RIP, we have indexers who take a quick look at it, make sure it looks okay, and we assign index terms so that people can find it more easily. And this usually takes about 1 business day. So if you enter your project, you should see it in RIP by the next day. If you've ever searched TRID, you'll know that you can see projects in TRID, and those are basically the RIP records that are just copied into the TRID database so that people only have to search for them in one place. But they are still RIP records. So when you make a change in RIP, it changes it in TRID, and when you delete it from RIP, it deletes from the TRID database as well. So this short slide is shorter because getting your reports, your final reports in TRID is easier than RIP, because all you have to do is notify TRIS that you have a final report and provide us that link. We have a little submission form on our website, or you can just email it to us and we take care of indexing it for you and putting it in the TRID database. It does take some time. So I would say when you submit a report to us, give us about a month to get it in until you can see it publicly available. Once it is in, you can, and it's been 6 months since the research has been completed, then you can delete the project record from RIP. And that final report record in TRID stands as the proof that that project was completed. So that obviously is a really quick overview of how to do things in RIP and TRID. But if you need more information, we do an annual RIP webinar. And it's recorded, so there's a link on our website to last year's, and then I'll be repeating it again in September of this year the exact date to be determined. But when I do have a date, I will let Amy and Robin know, and they can let you know. We also have another webinar on how TRID, and this one is mainly about how to search TRID and how to use TRID most effectively. This was recorded last year, and it doesn't update as often, so the recorded version should still be pretty accurate. And as you may know, we have RIP and we have TRID, but to confuse things, USDOT has two similar databases, Research Hub and Rosa P. So a year or so ago, we got together with USDOT and put together a webinar that explains the differences between each of those 4 databases. So you can look it up at 4 databases with a common goal, and you can see how the databases interact with each other and how they differ and how they're the same and what you need to do for each of them. So some new things to report. First of all, and we're very excited about this, is that data sets will be indexed in TRID starting next month. So I have a little sneak preview for you today on how that's going to look, but this is something we've been working on for a while and has been requested. Data sets is going to be just another format type, just like papers or reports would be. We currently have about 260 ready, and we also have about 300 UTC report records already in TRID that mention data sets, and we're going to go back and retroactively index those as separate entities for you. So if you've already mentioned it in the final report, we'll take care of it, and then going forward, you can send us the data sets and we'll index those. Let me see if I can pull up. This is the test server version. Let me share. Okay, so this is the test version of TRID. Oh, that's not. Okay, and all you'll need to do is click on Add Additional Filters, just as you're doing any other sort of TRID search. Scroll down under Source, University Transportation Centers. Then this is where the data sets are under Result Type. You can click Data Sets. These are our test versions. Clicking on any of them will show you that we have similar fields than we do for any other TRID record. We have a title, we have a abstract, we have authors, we have corporate authors. Where they differ is we have some media information, the version, the data set publisher. We also have a URL directly to the data set, but we also have a URL that will direct people to the report that that data set supports. And we'll also mention in the supplemental note the name of the report that it supports. And so when you're looking at your TRID results, you can see you'll be able to tell it the data set because it will say supporting data set. So then going back to my slides. We have, at the request of AASHTO RAC, we put together a very short little video, it's only 7 minutes, on how to best choose terms for the technical report documentation page that almost every report has. That field 17 is filled in with keywords. They sometimes are not very helpful. So we've created this video on how you can choose terms from the TRT, which provides that common and consistent vocabulary, so to make things easier for people to find. So check that out. And I wanted to end with one other really popular thing that TRIS has developed and has really expanded in the last year. And these are our snap searches. Snap searches are PDFs of about 5 or 6 pages that cover a specific hot topic or interesting topic in the industry. And what a snap search will have is it will list everything that TRB has published on a particular topic, events, including webinars, list of ongoing projects, and it will also have a pre-configured TRID search. And let me do one more show and tell here, and I will show you, for example, this is our snap search that we put together on communicable diseases. So clicking here will take you to TRID and everything that has been indexed in TRID on that topic. But we also have TRB research, the ongoing projects, committees and panels that address that issue, and webinars and conferences coming up. So it's sort of your one-stop shop on what everything TRB is doing on a particular topic. And we update these regularly. If it's a really hot topic like communicable diseases would be, it's updated frequently. Otherwise, it's updated at least every year. And that's really all I have for you, other than please make sure you contact us for assistance. If you need assistance, particularly with RIP and TRID, you can contact me directly, or you can contact TRIS more generally.
Thank you, Janet. We do have one question.
Mm-hmm.
The question is how long should a terminated research project stay listed in the RIP database?
If it is federally funded, and all the UTC grant program ones would count as that, they should be 6 months after the research was completed, and then they can be deleted. Was that the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, we have another question. When universities overhaul their websites or decide to change their website posting policies, often links get broken. Are the UTC final project reports copied to a UTC location before being posted to TRID, or are they only linked through each individual center's website? If the latter is the case, is there any possibility that the report be housed somewhere by the UTC program?
If a report has also, TRID is just an indexing service, and all we do is provide the URL usually back to the UTC. So if the UTC changes its URLs, then yes, the link will break. But federally funded research should also go to the Rosa P database, which is a repository, and it is a digital repository. So we will use that Rosa P link and include that on a TRID record. And we share records back and forth between Rosa P and TRID. So that hopefully takes care of a lot of the broken links, because people would always, that Rosa P link never changes or rarely changes. But if your UTC has overhauled all of its URLs, let us know. We can work with you on getting a spreadsheet of the old URLs and the new URLs, and we can update it in TRID pretty easily.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's all the questions that we have.
Okay, great.
Okay. Next up is Leighton Christensen from the U.S. Department of Transportation's National Transportation Library.
Janet, if you wouldn't mind stop sharing there for a second. I just want to pick up on, thank you, that last point that Janet made. Indeed, Rosa P is the repository of record by law and policy for USDOT funded research. So And as Janet mentioned, we share records back and forth to TRID. We catalog something, we send that record to TRID. We do this every week. We send TRID records with the links to the items that you've sent to us for inclusion in the repository. And yes, we are doing our best not to change those links ever. You know, we're trying to keep those stable. Other options are working with either us at DOT or your university, and I highly recommend talking to your university library or repository and getting persistent identifiers put on your items. That could be a digital object identifier, that could be a handle, that could be one of the wide variety of persistent digital persistent identifiers. That link is guaranteed to be globally unique and good forever. So you never have to change the citation, you never have to change the HTML coding. What you do have to do if your URLs change is you have to send the new URLs instead of to TRID, you send them to DataCite or Handle or whoever's creating your permanent identifiers so that they can update the backend base URL, because you can think of these persistent identifiers as permanent redirect links that never ever change. So these can go in the citation and you can print that PDF and you could cast it in cement and that link would still be good. We can talk about this another time, you know, we can future meeting, you can ask me questions, you can call me up, we'll work on it. But let me go ahead and get started with the presentation. So I will share my screen. I wasn't going to do slides, but then I'm going to give you a list of things that it's going to be easier for you to have the slides than it is going to be for you to write all these digital object identifiers, all these persistent links down. So, and I'm actually going to get back to that in a second. So again, thanks to the folks at the UTC program. Thanks, Caesar. Thanks to the grant managers and Janet for setting things up. It's always a pleasure to be here with you all. I'm looking forward to next year. I still got my Montana vest ready for next year. So I want to touch on just a couple of things today. First, I did tell you last year, this is basically the same slide deck as last year for in a lot of ways. We are working on an update to the public access plan. In fact, as we were meeting last year, we had a team of 60 people working on rewriting that policy, including many stakeholders from university research, transportation research centers who were part of that policy group, which is a little unusual, right? You know, federal agency invited outsiders in to help us write policy. And they worked on that doggedly over the summer. And we were, you know, getting ready to polish it up and put it into concurrence and get all the modes to sign off on it. And then an election happened. And then personnel changed all over DOT and everything. And so now the brakes are on, right? And so we hope to put the updated policy into concurrence later this summer. You'll see a new policy, you know, hopefully in the fall. That's my hope. And I think it will help everybody move forward because it's really based on what we've learned over the past 5.5 years of the public access policy and the feedback from you all. So thank you very much for that feedback. One of the things we're finding out is that the policy is still not completely socialized, not only out in the University Transportation Center world or the University Transportation Research world, but even within DOT. Not to be telling tales, but I gave a presentation to a mode last month. I won't name them, but it was the introduction to the public access policy 5.5 years later. So, you know, we're a little under-resourced. We're not doing everything we could or should, but we are trying to address that. And one of the ways that we've begun to address that since last year is we've stood up the Public Access Implementation Working Group as a topical research working group within OST-R. And as I said, we have 60 people working in the group. So we have folks from every mode working on implementation and improving the policy, making it easy for you all to implement, but also to improve understanding and implementation across the modes. So keep your eyes open for that. Now, I don't very often do live updates, but I did today. So here is the link for the CARE principles for Indigenous data governance. And I hope to have those into the upcoming version of the public access plan. And you'll see in the image that the CARE principles are aligned with the FAIR principles, and the FAIR principles were all about making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And that was very much about the data as an object. but it wasn't about the subjects of the data. It wasn't about the data as a cultural experience. And this is where the CARE principles come in, which is handling that data in an ethical way. And around the indigenous nations, this means that data is seen as a collective benefit, that indigenous nations have the authority to control their data and limit access, as we might any other data that has PII or business sensitive information in it. That there's a responsibility to the indigenous nation as data is collected, and that the highest degree of ethics is applied when working with indigenous subjects. Or indigenous partners, as the case may be. So this is a little bit different, right? This isn't just about the data as an object. This is about the data as it's collected, as the research is carried out. And so this means being very forward thinking in a way that is maybe even a little different than you're used to with your IRB, but in a similar vein, right? Thinking about the people who you're going to study, the folks who will be impacted by the research before the data is collected. So keep your eyes on that. And when these slides go out, you'll have the link in the slides. And as somebody who's very concerned about these sorts of things, I always put the text of my slides also in the speaker notes to make it easier for you to get that text out later on. So if we update the public access plan, we also have to do a lot of work on the public access implementation web pages. And part of that is migrating those web pages, right? For the last 5.5 years, they've been sitting on NTL servers. They don't belong in the National Transportation Library. The National Transportation Library does not write policy. The National Transportation Library does not enforce policy. We help to implement it because we're called out in the policy, and we do trainings and all of that because we're nice people and we want to work with you all. But this isn't our policy. We're named in it, but we didn't write it. Well, a few of us had a hand in writing it, of course, but it's not an NTL policy. This is a DOT-wide policy. And so these web pages are going to migrate over to the OST-R servers. They're going to become part of the office with the folks over there at the UTC program as well. So all those web links are going to change. All those web links you've been used to using, which are terrible, relative, long, gross web links with special characters and white spaces in them. I didn't write them. That was before my time. I wouldn't have done it that way. Are all going to change. So what I've done to make your life easier is I've created persistent identifiers for all of those links. Digital object identifiers, DOIs. You see the list there. Don't write these down. These slides are coming your way after this presentation. These links will always take you to those pages. The title of the page might change a little bit, but the subject matter, the aboutness of the page will stay the same. And as these pages get migrated, I personally will update the backend links at DataSite at our DOI server. So you should never notice any problems with the links. But persistence isn't magic, right? We have to maintain these links. We have to do actual work to make these things persistent. So I can't guarantee 100% that they'll work, but I can guarantee in the high 90s, which is pretty good compared to usually what happens at DOT when somebody on a whim changes the base URLs, which just happened at NTL back a couple of months ago, which is why this became important. So I'm going to wrap up here in just a second. I'm going to say a couple of things about Rosa P. It's been brought up. Rosa P continues to be the repository of record for USDOT funded research. If you've clicked around in there, you'll notice that we have many collections within Rosa P. And I wanted to segue this back to one of the earlier questions about how do we protect the UTC content and whatnot when links change at our home institutions and things like that. Well, we would love to work with you to make sure that we've captured the things that you've produced over the years, and we've been in discussions with the UTC grant managers. I haven't scheduled that meeting yet. That's entirely on me, Dawn and Denise. That's my fault that meeting hasn't been scheduled yet. But we want to create a collection, special collection within Rosa P that captures and collects the UTC research in one place where you can just click and go straight to the UTC collection. And that will give you the hundreds and thousands of reports and data sets and other research outputs such as software, which will be included in the new update, by the way, of the public access policy. All of that will be in one location. And so look for that coming up soon, I hope. We'll have a few things to iron out, but it's very easy for us to create collections in Rosa P. The hardest part will be going back and doing a little natural language processing and, you know, identifying all the UTCs in our records, in our 57,000 records, and making sure we get everything that belongs in the UTC collection into the UTC collection as quickly as possible. And that's not always as easy as you would like it to be, because some folks remember to credit the UTC program when they're publishing their reports, and some folks don't. I won't name any names or point to anybody on the screen right now, but it happens. You know, that won't be as easy as it could be, but we'll work with you. And there's ways that we can identify some of these things and hopefully get, you know, high percentage of the UTC output over the past many years into a single collection. And that will help alleviate those concerns about lost items. One of the great things about digital items and the great thing about our repository, Rosa P, is we practice 3-2-1 backup, which means we have 3 copies of every report sent to us or data set sent to us, stored in 2 different geographic locations. So if there's an earthquake on the West Coast and our server falls into the Pacific, we've got our server here on the East Coast to back it up, and in at least 1 different media. So we don't keep everything on site at DOT, we've got things spread around. And as long as we are mirroring the content that you've shared with the world through your website or through TRID, then it's safe with us, right? Always somebody has it. It's not true that once something goes up on the internet, it's there forever. Unfortunately, it's usually only the embarrassing things that are there forever, but we do our best to save things for as long as possible. We believe in perpetual preservation or getting as close to it as we can. So that's it for me. Reach out, you know how to get hold of me. I've gotten great emails from many of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Leighton. I do have a couple of questions. The first is when the new public access policy will get sent out to the UTC administrators in addition to the directors?
I'm going to hold a parade for the new policy, in fact, and you're all invited. So yes, we will iron that out. Have no fear. You will know.
Okay. And the next question, this is also for Janet as well as Leighton or any of the UTC grant managers. As the grants end, do we have any suggestions for the best way to archive everything?
So it depends what y'all mean by everything, right? So Rosa P, our mandate is for your research outputs, reports, data sets, software, code, programming, paperwork, all of that stuff. That's not us. We don't care. Maybe the grant managers care, but I don't. So it depends what you mean by everything. And so that's the part that we might have to sort out, and that might be a case by case basis. But if we can get to a point where we have a robust UTC collection, and it sounds like we have, from what was being spoken about by Amy earlier, we have a couple of years before some of you, time out. We have time to work together to make sure that we have as much of your collection as possible. So then at the end, it's not a scramble, right? And we can do bulk upload, we can do bulk update. And then of course, we pass those records over to Janet and Bill over at TRB. We can certainly work on something. And if we want to take this up, a different conversation than say the conversation we're having on copyright next week, if we want to start to have a conversation in this group about preserving our output before we come to 2023, maybe that's something that we could think about. It doesn't have to be in one of these annual meetings, but it could be a side conversation or other meeting that we start to have.
Thank you. And I guess this is also for the UTC grant managers. Where would webinars created by a UTC belong when the UTC ends?
I'll take that one. That's a very good question. So if a UTC, I'm assuming this question means that once a UTC grant has ended and if the UTC is no longer part of the federal program, we've actually never come across that since this is a fairly new initiative. I think that if anything is done under the UTC auspices of the UTC and you've sent us the URL for a past webinar, it will remain on the UTC page. We have not discussed it, we have not discussed end times with our IT folks or our webinar folks yet? That's a really good question.
And Robin, if I
yeah.
may, it's
Yeah.
a two-part question, right? One is, the question really is up to the school. How long they are going to maintain that particular link on their front. I mean, that's their, the burden is on them. The second part, which is, how long do we maintain our so-called bulletin or whatever you call it, right? That's our piece. So there are two parts to this.
Caesar, I would say actually there's a third part to that, and that's the consideration. Do we consider those videos outputs of the research process, and then do we put those in the repository? Since it's funded by DOT, is it part of research, and do they belong in Rosa P? And I think that's a discussion as we're having the meetings about setting up a collection in Rosa P that we need to discuss, because we can take video. Now it would be, sort of the current format MP4, and that down the road may break. So those may have a shorter shelf life than many of the other types of outputs that we have in Rosa P. But it's a discussion that we can have. We're happy to have that.
Very good point, Chris.
Leighton, I'll talk to you offline about that. Thank you.
Okay. We don't have any more questions that I see in the Q&A. I'm not sure if Caesar has any closing remarks.
Well, I mean, this has been a very good set of presentations and discussions and questions, and we welcome any follow-up questions. If you still have them, send it to your grant manager, and we would be willing to entertain as far as we can. Thank you.
Okay, we do have 10 minutes left, and I did see another question pop up here. It says, if you have webinars uploaded to YouTube, do you want those links instead of the MP4s?
I'll have to talk with Danielle about that. She's the expert on that. Whoever's asked that, could you shoot me an email with the right language, and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. All right. Again, I would like to thank all the speakers. I would like to thank everybody for joining us for tomorrow's session. That's going to be the CUTC session, the Council of University Transportation's executive session. Thank you all, and I hope you have a nice afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.